Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we chart the course from service to civilian triumph. I'm Adam Peters, a veteran, entrepreneur, and your fellow navigator in the quest for a life of impact and fulfillment. My mission is simple: to empower you with the tools and stories that turn challenge into opportunity. Having walked the path from active duty to where I stand now, I understand the search for purpose that comes with hanging up the uniform. It's a path I've walked, with its trials, its tribulations, and its victories, and it's a journey we're on together. This podcast is more than just conversation. It's a beacon for those seeking to redefine our missions through entrepreneurship. It's about igniting the entrepreneurial spirit that lives within us, the spirit that compels us to create, lead, and make our mark on the world. Here we connect with veterans who have built businesses, sparked change, and found their purpose in the marketplace of ideas. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've transformed their service into startups, their experiences into enterprises, and they're proof that you can too. So whether you're scribbling business plans on napkins or stepping into the arena of innovation, remember, you're not alone. You're in good company. So let's explore these stories of transformation and take the first steps together on our path to purpose. Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Strategic Veteran. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we have the privilege of speaking with Walt Morgan, a retired U.S. Navy commander whose career has been marked by remarkable service and inspiring leadership. Walt dedicated 23 years of his life to the Navy, serving as a helicopter pilot and later transitioning into roles as intel briefer and a university professor while on active duty. His journey is a testament to resilience, leadership, and a commitment to growth and service. After retiring from the Navy, Walt embarked on a new path, leveraging his extensive experience in leadership to become a corporate leadership development coach. Today, he's a professional integral coach, helping individuals from all walks of life achieve their personal and professional development goals through his business, Translational Lift Coaching. His commitment to raising collective leadership capacity and fostering personal growth has made significant impact on many lives. Walt's journey is not just about his professional achievements, but also about his personal evolution. He's deeply passionate about adventure, connection, and growth, values that guide him in both his personal and professional life. He's also founded a coaching program at the University of Colorado, demonstrating his dedication to developing future leaders. Join us as we delve into Walt's story, explore his military service, the challenges he faced during transition to civilian life, and his ongoing mission to empower others through leadership coaching. Let's dive in and warmly welcome Walt Morgan, a true embodiment of what it means to be a strategic veteran. Walt, brother, I really appreciate you being here. I'm super grateful for you taking the time to record with us today, and welcome to the show.
Adam, I'm so honored to be invited to be a part of this conversation. I'm so grateful for the work that you do on behalf of veterans and sharing your journey and inspiring others and just meeting our veterans where they are in their journey and offering them something that allows all of us to take the next step and grow and continue to serve in our own way. So thank you again.
Yeah, appreciate that, brother. Let's just dive right into your story and get started. I'm excited about this one. Another pilot on the show. It's always cool to get to talk to other pilots, considering that's what I chose to. I used to think my dream was. I'm actually living my dream now by doing this. But just tell everybody kind of where you grew up, what inspired you to join the Navy, and what that whole process looked like for you.
Yeah, so for the pilot thing, the story that I most often tell is I was in kindergarten and my kindergarten teacher said, "Hey, draw a picture of what you want to do or be when you grow up." I drew a picture of a helicopter and wrote, "I want to be a helicopter pilot." So that was in kindergarten, so 5 years old. I grew up on a ranch in Oregon, and I would share that picture of the helicopter that I drew when I was 5 is still hanging in my childhood room on that ranch in Oregon. So that's the flying part of it, and I'm not saying that there weren't other things that I wanted to do when growing up, and I'd even offer that. Shortly before I showed up to flight school, I like, oh, maybe I want to be a jet pilot. I don't know, but I think the helicopter thing was always there. Like that was, even as I think back on like my childhood imaginings and dreaming, there was always a helicopter involved. It felt natural for me. Um, so I grew up on this ranch in Oregon, but it was more of a hobby ranch. Both my parents were teachers, but they wanted to have something to keep my sister and myself busy. So I worked pretty hard growing up. Didn't necessarily love hard work, but that's what was required of me. I grew up in an area, a logging town in Oregon, that didn't put a lot of people into college. Like, it could be kind of a rough and tumble place. There's only 30 of us in my graduating class. At least six of us are gone. It's probably more, into things like, in some cases being beaten to death. Right? It was a little bit. It can be a tough place, and yet it's probably still the place that I feel most connected to. It does make sense to me there somehow, but it didn't back then. Like, that's something that grew in time, and at that time, I just wanted to get out of there and to be someplace else. I didn't feel like I fit in at the time. And so a way out was through an ROTC scholarship. So I applied for a Navy ROTC scholarship. This is in the 80s. This is such a good deal. It paid for college practically anywhere as long as you could get into that college. So that got me out of rural Oregon. I ended up graduating from the University of Colorado in Boulder. I'm not still in Boulder. I actually had to leave. The Navy required that, but I'm back in Boulder. But in college, um, had a went to school in the ROTC program and got a got a spot in flight school. And so my first fleet airframe was the H-46. So it's the tandem rotor. It looks a little bit like the Chinook, but shipboard compatible. It's probably a third smaller, and that to this day remains the most beautiful aircraft I've ever seen. It is I I used when I was an instructor pilot. So I was an instructor pilot for both the 46 and for the MH-60 Sierra, which is a brand new helicopter. This is farther down the line in the story, but I used to take my 60 flight students, right? And this is a brand new. The MH-60 Sierra was brand new. It was like I was, I think, one of the, if not the first fleet pilot qualified in this airframe. It's brand new, but I take my students, my flight students, and on the way back to the hangar, I'm like, hey, come sit in this H-46 with me. Come sit in this. And they'd sit in it, and it's just like this old thing with steam gauges, and it's just like the fabric on the seats are torn. And I said, this is the most beautiful aircraft that the United States Navy has ever flown. And I said, someday you'll say the same thing about the MH-60 Sierra. Do you know why? And they'd say, because it's my first fleet airframe. I'm like, no, because you don't fucking know better. It's the 46, easily the greatest airframe ever. So anyway, the H-46 was my first fleet airframe, and then I migrated. I was on the ground floor of the MH-60 Sierra. So I flew each of those for roughly 1,500 hours apiece.
Wow. The MH-60, that's a Black Hawk,
So
right?
it's based on the Black Hawk frame. What happened is the Navy was really behind on procurement of a replacement for the 46. Like, we knew for years that this airframe needed to be replaced. It had this kind of nasty habit of burning burning in midair and disintegrating. We lost 5 of those in a pretty short period of time doing that. Um, in my in the final year of my first tour in a fleet squadron. That's a word salad. That's not important. But in 1 year in a squadron, something like over 50% of our engines that we installed never made it to 100 hours before failure. Like, we were,
Well, that's not efficient, is it?
no, it was just kind of as old as a 50s design. It was falling apart, and most of us most of us found ourselves behind the ship at some point without an engine. That was normal. I went on a deployment once. There were 12 flyers on this detachment. So it was just a small detachment that went out to sea for 6 months. 12 flyers, 6 of us were pilots, 6 of us were air crewmen, 12 of us. And of those 12, 4 of us had egressed from, not me, I say us, for the 12. This didn't happen to me, but 4 of the flyers on the detachment, a full 1/3 of us, had egressed from a sinking helicopter in the prior year. Right, like it had happened a lot. One of them was a crewman. She got tangled up in her cord, disentangled herself, punched her way out of a plexiglass bubble window, and egressed. And based on the damage of her ears, the flight surgeon indicated it was below 60 feet that she egressed from that sinking helicopter. She was kind of a badass. So anyway, all of this to say, the 46, the most beautiful, God's own chariot, the most beautiful aircraft the Navy has ever flown, was due to be replaced. The Navy loves to invest in jets. The Navy isn't always so thoughtful about investing in helicopters. And so this is my observation based on a little time at AirPac. And so they needed a new helicopter, and they didn't really think it through. The Army had overpurchased on Black Hawk airframes, and the Navy said, okay, we'll just convert those to a new helicopter for the Navy. To be Navy compatible, of course, it has to fold up into a tiny little ball that we can push into the hangar to be worthy, to be compatible with going to sea. And then they put in the first glass cockpit in one of our military helicopters. So that was a first. So it was like 80% compatible with the Blackhawk, but there was some brand new stuff with it also. But between you and me and your entire audience, um, is it was ab- it was absolutely the wrong aircraft for the Navy, right? They got it wrong, and we don't have to have that debate here. But a good multi-purpose airframe has a ramp and a little bit of cabin space so that we can get some troops in and out.
Yeah, it's typical military fashion. They give you what they think you need versus what you actually
No,
need. Yeah, that's a
they gave us what the Army gave us,
of course.
essentially.
Yeah, yeah. So how was flying? Was it everything that you thought it would be and more when you finally got into the helicopter and all
It was
that?
more than, absolutely. Like it was more than I could have ever hoped for. I told you that growing up in Oregon, I felt outside of, I felt different, I felt yeah, like an outsider is probably the best way. And in helicopter squadrons, I felt my most accepted. I felt my most engaged. I felt my strongest sense of community. And then in the cockpit itself, while flying, I was my best self. I was my most attentive self. I was my most aware, directive, collaborative, all these things. I was my best self and my most proficient self. So I felt really comfortable there, like I belonged there. And I just loved flying missions, particularly external cargo, which we call vert rep in the Navy missions in helicopters. It was just could not get enough of it. It's all I wanted to do.
Well, hey, I mean, it sounds like you landed where you were supposed to. I can relate to what you're saying about being your best self in the cockpit because even when I went to flight school, however, I decided flying as a profession was not for me, mainly because I just don't agree with what you have to do to get to the airlines or to fly private jets or whatever. But I was my best self in the cockpit. You have to be attentive. You have to be aware of what's going on. You have to collaborate because the workload sometimes is just so much, right? And I absolutely relate to that. And I also relate to what you were talking about with steam gauges. I'll never forget November 53351 is what I took my private pilot check ride in, and it had steam gauges. I've got very limited experience on glass cockpits to this day. When I was going through CFI, I had to learn the G1000, and I was like, can I just have my old steam gauges back? Like, I know how to fly
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, and of course adapted to the glass cockpit. But I can't claim that anything about it necessarily made my life better. I mean, there's few bells and whistles, but it looked cooler, if nothing else.
For sure. So, in addition to being a pilot, you served as an intel briefer and a university professor. That's the one I'm really interested in. I know in the Army, we have guys that'll go out and they'll be like ROTC instructors on the enlisted side, all that stuff. But you actually were a professor at the University of Colorado,
So
huh?
you were closer on the first stab at that. It's easier to portray in civilian parlance. So I became the executive officer and erstwhile commanding officer of my alma mater here at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And the role is dual hatted. On one hand, I'm the Naval ROTC. Um, Director of a program, or we are collectively as a staff. It's a leadership development program, and people don't necessarily get what ROTC is. And Navy is different than Army, is different than Air Force. You know, when I say Navy, it's the Navy and the Marine Corps. We have both sides of that. Um, and sorry, my headphones are doing funny things in my ears. I don't know if you can hear it or not.
I cannot hear it now.
Um, so I think it was probably the movie Animal House that gave the wrong impression about ROTC. We don't recruit. We're not a club. Like, the people that come to us are there because they're on a scholarship, right? That's already happened. They're actually a pretty impressive group in the sense that the average cumulative GPA is 3.8. The average SAT score is 1400. Now, I always questioned, wait, was that a product of their own ambition or of their parents' ambition? And sometimes we found out the answer to that pretty quickly. But the idea is we get this pretty high performing group of young people. Most of them have been captains of their sports teams, et cetera. And it's our job to, I always kind of thought of it as creating sufficient experience and excitement so that we could push them off onto the fleet with readiness. Sometimes, as one of my criticisms, and if your listeners are academy grads, they can complain about me and send me hate mail, and that's fine. But one of my criticisms of the Naval Academy, at least, is, man, when those midshipmen commissioned and got to the fleet, they already seemed depleted, right? The academy seems like it had taken a lot of their energy, excitement away and kind of replaced it with something that felt a little bit more jaded. And so I always kind of viewed my role in Naval ROTC is to also create energy and excitement for service so that they would carry that on to the next step. Uh,
I think that's an awesome point that you're making because you are the first Navy commander that I've had on here, or actually first officer with this level of rank that has not been to a service academy that did an ROTC program. And at least from my experience in the Army infantry, and this is not knocking any of the guys that I've had on here from West Point or from Annapolis or from the Air Force Academy. I just, my experience when I was coming in is the ROTC graduates that we would get as platoon leaders were far and away more receptive and understood how to take guidance from the enlisted guys who have, at the time I was in, more combat experience than these guys could ever hope to get in a short period of time or whatever, versus the service academy guys, the West Pointers, particularly because I was in the Army, they would come in and they would just like, I'm a fucking lieutenant and you have to listen to me. And it's like, dude, that's not how this works, bro. Like this isn't, you have no idea what you're doing at all.
yeah. So, and a little bit of compassion for for the role of being a very junior officer, where you're given authority over and no experience at all. It can be a really challenging thing to navigate. I certainly didn't navigate it well. I'd say here's a fundamental difference between um, the Navy and the Army, or a general, we'll call it a general difference. The Navy has very specific officer jobs and enlisted jobs, and they don't really overlap. So I think naval officers can become more comfortable with this idea that, oh, I just got assigned to be the division officer for the paraloft. I don't know the first thing about flight gear at all. So I'm just going to be the officer and do officer things and not know the technical work that's being done. But in the infantry, the officers in the enlisted have the same core skill set. In combat, they're probably what, 80% common in what they have to be able to do with communication and maneuvering and shooting and all these things. And in the Navy, we tend not to have that. Like, the jobs are so clearly distinct and separate, it creates a different challenge, I think, for both enlisted and officers.
For sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's a big challenge. And I think also, speaking to what you said about the service academy guys, they look depleted when they came out of there. It's 4 years of military before you go to the military. And I've talked to every single one of these service academy grads that I've had on this show, and I ask them the same question. It's like, what were you thinking? Did you know it was going to be 4 years of military before you went? And all of them have been like, no, that plebe year, I was like, what the fuck did I get myself into here? Right. Like really questioning their decision. But also on the backside of that, tons of experiences that they wouldn't have gotten anywhere else, and high praise for the institution that they came from. And I'm not saying that every officer I ever met from West Point was bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. I had some really, really great ones. One of my first ever PLs when I first got in the Army, Christopher Staub, was a West Pointer, and he was great. He was awesome. And so it just kind of runs the gamut there. So I appreciate you speaking about the differences between ROTC and the service academies, because we haven't had anybody on here that
Mhm.
can speak to that yet.
So, in the Navy, where officers gather, we call it the wardroom. And when I was XO of the Naval ROTC unit, when I got a new officer and a new staff member, we'd have, and they could be from anywhere. Some of them were OCS, some of them were ROTC, but different places. Some of them were Academy. And I'd say, okay, so let's assume that each of the commissioning sources bring value to our wardroom in some form, right? So what is it the academy brings? Okay, so it brings continuity of tradition and a certain depth of training that we can't replicate in ROTC. But then I'd ask the question, what is the value that ROTC brings? Like, we're in this commissioning program. What makes us unique? What's our value proposition around training young officers? And really, what it would boil down to is real life experience,
I was just thinking that. I was going to say the same thing.
or something closer to real. I mean, college and university isn't real life, but there's people would come, like alumni or others would come and want to give us money for various things to make our midshipmen's lives easier. And I used to kind of get prickly around that and reject them a little bit. Like, I don't want our midshipmen's lives to be easier. Not in that way. I want them to sleep on couches. I want them to eat ramen. I want them to take that trip to Mexico and get in over their head a little bit and get scared and have those experiences, so that when they're in the fleet, And that sailor sitting across the desk from them, and that sailor is stationed in San Diego but can't afford to live in San Diego and is driving from Temecula an hour away, but is now paying for gas and the car's falling apart. And oh, by the way, somebody's pregnant, and all these things. Like they can sit across that desk and have some depth of understanding that
Yeah, just be able to relate a little bit,
and
right?
that will allow them to support that sailor a little bit better. Um, you know, in ROTC, we have to do our own laundry. Like that's a thing.
I think this is a perfect segue into what I think is going to be one of my favorite questions that I'm going to ask you. I always try to ask our guests, what was a pivotal moment during your military service that deeply influenced your perspective on leadership and your career path? And I asked you this before when you booked to come on the show, and your answer, I think, is very indicative of the type of leader that you were in the Navy, and someone without even having met you until a little bit less than an hour ago, I would have been inclined to follow you. You said you were looking at sailors that were assigned to your detachment on the flight deck and understanding that the promises made to them by a recruiter were more important than your career. Will you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. This was the critical moment. I was an officer in charge of a detachment, and that meant that I was heading out to sea on a ship. I had two helicopters and 30 people, and we were going to be gone for 6 to 8 months. I would say that during that time, I only talked to my boss once over those 6 months, and it was an email. I didn't even talk to him. I just sent him an email that said, "Hey, I intend to violate SOP for these reasons," and he wrote back, "Roger that," and that was it. That's the whole correspondence. So it really was a remarkably independent time. I was lieutenant commander at the time. I was 35 years old. I was a kid and had just kind of this overwhelming sense of responsibility for all air operations on that ship. And one of the things that really gets somebody in that role in trouble is sailors gone wild on liberty. Like if you want to get relieved, it's because your sailors got drunk and beat up a cab driver in Dubai, right? Like that's the biggest risk, the biggest kind of like risk that's hard to control. Like the stuff that happens
Yeah, right.
on maintenance and safety of flight. Yes, that's on me also. But the things that really got people in trouble were sailors gone wild. And so we're pulling into our first port, and I'm just like really just feeling tight about this. Like, oh my God, my career is in my sailors' hands. They're going out on liberty. They're going to do stupid stuff. I'm going to get in trouble. I could just feel the weight of it and the tightness of it. And you're like, well, what do I do about this? Like, what rules do I put in place to kind of mitigate that risk and to control it? And that's when I had that moment of clarity, which was, look, each one of these sailors has raised their right hand to serve the Constitution of the United States. Each one of these sailors was recruited by a recruiter, and that recruiter told them two things. One, you're going to see the world. Two, you're going to grow up so that you can achieve what you want in life. And this is going to set you on that path. I'm like, it's not my job to worry about getting in trouble. It's my job to make sure that these sailors get to see this world like just as they were promised. That's what they're here to do. And so before our first liberty, I just they were in formation, and I just looked at them and I just imagined each of them and their hopes and thought about their service and I told them, I said, this is my promise to you that every single port that we go into over the next 6 months, I will do everything in my power to maximize your liberty. Everything. As long as there's not work to be done, right? Because that's going to come first. But as long as there's not work to be done, I'm going to send you out there. I'm going to sign every single overnight Liberty chit that comes across my desk. I am going to find every loophole in the rules, and we're going to get you out there. And I did. I did that for 6 months, and my sailors never got me in trouble.
And I think that, like I said, speaks to the type of leader that you are. And I think that's indicative of a good leader, the leader who takes the time to sign all of those passes that come across his desk, because that's what you're supposed to do as a commander. You're not supposed to wield your power like a stick and be like, well, I don't like this dude, he doesn't get to go, right? Because a lot of commanders will do that. You just don't like a guy, or they don't have a reason. You never get a reason. I never got a reason when my passes would get denied, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. I've been a model soldier, or as close to a model soldier as I can be, because we're not all perfect. Why won't you give me this 4-day pass that I'm asking for when I don't ask you for anything ever, right? And so kudos to you. And when I read that, I was like, man, this is a guy that I would have wanted to serve under for sure.
Well, and thank you. And I also, would acknowledge there's a lot of places where I've come up wanting or insufficient as a leader as well. But I will tell you a quick story about that, because we're coming back. It's like, 6 months later, we're coming back and we're pulling um, into Perth on the west coast of Australia, and I heard this like I had to sit at the head table with the captain and all of the senior folks, unfortunately, because the pilot table is always the fun place, and that's where I had sat on all my previous cruises because I was junior, and that was fun. And there's always the loudest, most obnoxious table, and I could tell as we're getting close to Perth, the pilots are really ramping it up. Something was going on because they're just like laughing obnoxiously at every single meal. And so finally, one of my pilots approached me and they said, "Hey, um, Scotty, one of the pilots, let's we're creating this adventure for Scotty, and we're going to put him on a train in Perth, and we're going to send him to Melbourne, which is our next port, and this is the checklist of things he has to do. Here's the 10 things he has to accomplish on this train journey, all of them inappropriate and horrifying. And look, when he comes to you with this request, just pretend, right? Like, just pretend like he's got a chance. Like, obviously, this isn't realistic." And I'm like, okay. And I thought about it, and so I went to started working with the admin at the air wing on the carrier, and I said, "Hey, like, what would it take, to actually create this permission?" And it wasn't that hard. So I actually did. I did approve his request and got the carrier air wing commander to approve his request for his train trip from Perth to Melbourne. And so while that was going on, another one of our helicopter detachments was pulling into another place in Australia on the other side. They were pulling into uh, it doesn't matter, Brisbane on the other side. And one of the pilots, also in my squadron, but on a different detachment, hopefully that's new, not too confusing. He was on a different ship, but this like kind of really uptight, like big Navy ship. And his parents were meeting him in Australia, and he requested leave in Australia, and it was denied, and he was chewed out for like not respecting his. I don't know. Like, he got out of the.
Yeah, that
He,
what? That doesn't even make sense. Or not respecting what? Like, his parents are free to travel the world. They can go to Australia at any point. So what if it accidentally coincides with when we're going to be
but
in
why not
port?
take care of a young pilot? And that's somebody. He was a good pilot. He was a good officer. He got out of the Navy as soon as he could. Of course he did, because he was getting shit on by the uptight Navy structure. And that was just, those were two things that were happening at the exact same moment, right? Giving permission for a guy to take a train trip across Australia. for,
Did he actually do
so
it?
we got him on the train, and he had only gotten started on his train voyage when word came down that the southern seas were too big for us to to get to Melbourne. So our itinerary changed from Perth to Guam. And so I was out on liberty when this went down, but the duty officer got the word and he immediately contacted him via is like flip phones back then. Immediately contacted him by cell phone, and then he caught the next train back. But honestly, I was always kind of bummed that the duty officer got to him first. Like I thought it would, like he could have flown from Melbourne to Guam. That would have been fine. I really wanted him to get his train trip done. That would have been an epic story for his entire life.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. So let's talk about you get to it's time to retire, and we're gonna start moving into your transition. What led to the decision to retire? I mean, were you just done? Did you not want to go to the next rank and do all the duties and responsibilities filled with that? What led to your decision to actually get out?
Yeah. So when I got what I didn't finish explaining, and I apologize for the tangent, but when I was assigned as the XO of the Naval ROTC unit, that was dual-headed as a professorship. And so that I actually was an associate professor at the University of Colorado teaching leadership while active duty. So that's why I express it that way.
One question about that: what year were you there? What year were you teaching? Because my wife actually went to that
Yeah,
college.
I was teaching here I still teach here, like 12 years later. I still teach classes at the university, but I was active duty here 2012 to 2016.
Okay, I'm gonna ask her when we're done with this if she might have run into you somewhere. She thinks it's cool. I don't know. She went to like I think 7 or 8 different colleges trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life before she finally settled on being a writer. And then I met her in Washington at the Evergreen State College. We both went and graduated from there. So she got her bachelor's from Evergreen, but she went to a bunch of different colleges in between. I think the main reason she went to Colorado was just to get away from Washington, to get away from home, and then really quickly figured out that it was too expensive for her. She couldn't keep paying for it. So she moved back home and, kind of tried the college thing as she would make money to pay for college.
Yeah, and this is a particularly expensive area to live also on top of just being independent, trying to live life and get classwork done. Um, so I actually was a professor here, and I really, really loved that. So I'm going to circle back and touch on that in just a minute. So we'll leave that hanging out there. Um, so I'd been in for 23 years. I had been passed over for command, for squadron command. There were circumstances around that that don't matter. I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. It was just
It's a politics game,
it,
right? It's fine to say
yeah,
that.
but it is. But the politics weren't like, did I have a nasty habit of poking people in the eye when I didn't have to poke them in the eye? Yes, that did happen
Yes.
sometimes.
Yep.
But even then, I had done really well, and it just happened that my community merged with another community, and um, and the opportunities for my community got diminished and the others. So that the politics were actually bigger politics than just me kind of being a pain in the ass, um, and that's fine. But I'd been passed over, so I was pretty career limited as a commander at that point. I've been in for 23 years, and I discovered this love for the subject of leadership. And in my 40 years teaching it, I I just it became really expansive to me in ways that I didn't realize was possible. And I began to think about leadership in new ways, understand leadership in new ways. I continue to do so. That's a journey that is ongoing. And I really got excited about meeting people wherever they were in their leadership journey and supporting them as they grew also, which is part of my role as a professor. The classes I was teaching were Navy leadership or Navy leadership classes, but honestly, a third of the students coming in were civilian students, so I was getting all kinds in there. I just fell in love with that. I was back in Boulder, the place I'd fallen in love with as a student, and now I was living here in this kind of amazing place. And I thought, yeah, it kind of makes sense to maybe off ramp and explore the next thing. Um, and so as I thought about retirement and about what I wanted to do next, there were these things that I'm supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to go to the airlines. Many of my squadron mates had gone to the airlines. I'm supposed to be in defense consulting or defense contracting. A smattering of them had done that. I'm supposed to go to Amazon and lead a team at Amazon. I don't know. These things I'm supposed to do. And and that's when I realized there's a crossroads at retirement. And the crossroads is go to a place where people understand who you are. Welcome, Commander Morgan. We've been waiting for you. Here's the desk that you're going to sit in as you write out the rest of your life, right? Like here's your desk. And that was kind of like, or here's your aircraft, and don't forget to put on the autopilot at 35,000 feet, and we'll see you in 6 hours, right? It's just, and not to take away from that. Like my friends that fly in the airlines enjoy that, but it didn't feel right for me. And I'll go back to how much I love flying helicopters in the Navy. There was no way, and I'm sure that this is true for many of your listeners, Adam. There's no way to replicate this experience that we had. There's no way to replicate those relationships, the missions, the resources, the uniqueness of it. There's no way to replicate that. So I just didn't want to try. I didn't want to try to fly an aircraft when I could never go back to the ship, being with those sailors and flying with those crews and doing those missions that I love so much. There's just no way to replicate that. So I didn't want to be a shadow of myself, I think was my
I
big
agree with
fear.
that. I think that's one of the biggest problems that plagues our military community as they transition is the being able to find something that replicates the environment that you just spent a significant chunk of your life in, right? I know that's something that I constantly miss, right? Particularly as I think it may be a little bit different in like the bond that's formed with like a job like the infantry, right? Like where we're in the suck all of the time, and we spoke a little bit previously before we started recording about you believe there's different levels of sacrifice, and maybe that's kind of key in the infantry and why the relationships are different. But I've never found another place that replicates what I had when I was in an infantry unit. And I had opportunities just like you were talking about, right? You're supposed to go to Amazon, you're supposed to go to to the airlines, you're supposed to do it's laid out for you. And we had Brandon Jenkins, he's also another pilot, he's also a entrepreneur and a coach, and he calls it the golden path fallacy, right? Like this path that's just laid out for you, this is what you're supposed to do. And he very much like you believes like that's not what I wanted to do. Like what about what I want, right? Like what about that part of me that doesn't want to do that? And so it sounds like you had a pretty good handle on that, right? Like you had the fact that you're back in Boulder and you absolutely loved it there, even from your time when you were in college. You loved teaching leadership. And so I can see where this is all starting to go, right? Like this is what developed your business. And so having said all of that, what was the most difficult part of your transition?
Hmm. So the week before I went on terminal leave, I felt a shooting nerve pain down my leg. And that grew over the course of the day. And this is how I would describe it. As we understand, nerve pain feels different than structural pain or muscular pain. It's nerve pain. It's its own unique, miserable, horrible thing. And I felt like a knife had been stabbed in my lower back. And in that knife was the full spectrum of nerve pain, from the quick buzzy nerve pain to the slow throbbing nerve pain. It was all there in that knife wound in my lower back. And I felt like that same knife had been stabbed into my kneecap with all of the full spectrum of nerve pain. And then a rope of fire was connecting those two knife points. And it was too painful to stand for more than 3 minutes. So suddenly, 1 week before terminal leave, I couldn't stand for more than 3 minutes. I couldn't walk for more than 3 minutes. I I got my MRI immediately because I'd never experienced anything like this. And like, you have bulging discs and helicopter pilot lower back pain, and you might have to go into surgery and have those reduced. And meanwhile, I'm just terrified because I can't walk. And within a month, my right leg had shriveled to a toothpick. Like it atrophied. My butt, my upper leg was just all, oh, historically meaty, was all just like a toothpick. It was gone. And so this went on for 2 months, and I was heading for surgery, and I couldn't walk. Like, how do you shower? How do you shave when you can't be upright for more than 3 minutes? How do you live your life? Like, this was before Zoom was a norm. Like, I'm just the mercy of this was I wasn't in pain as long as I was sitting or lying down. That's the mercy. But as soon as I got up, this pain. And so I was getting ready, I was heading down that road of surgery, and a friend dropped a book on my porch. And the name of the book is Healing Back Pain, and it's by Dr. Sarno. And I read the book, and its basic premise is this: hey, guy with the shriveled leg and the nerve pain, you're not going through a physical event. Your doctor is going to tell you that you have bulging discs, and you're going to think you're going through a physical event. What you're really going through is an emotional event. And I thought, well, why would I be going through an emotional event? Like, what could that possibly be about? And and so basically the three principles of this book were: one, press believe that this is emotional; two, quit doing your physical therapy; three, live your life as normally as possible. Those are I'm like, okay, like I got nothing else to do but to believe this, but I still couldn't understand why I might be going through an emotional event. And so after finishing that book, 3 days later, I took Hank, our dog, on a 15-minute walk. This was unbelievable, right? Like for 2 months, I couldn't be upright for more than 3 minutes. We went on a 15-minute walk. I might have found a little bench to sit on halfway, but it was still a big deal. And then less than a week after that, I hiked a local 3-mile loop that goes through the foothills here slowly, right? And my right leg was dragging because it was so weak, but I did it. And then it was like a week after that. I'm not kidding. Certainly less than 2 weeks. I put on a camelback, and I said, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to walk out this front door and we're going to see. And some 4 hours later, some crazy amount of time later, I was standing on top of Green Mountain, and which is a 2,500 foot climb from our house and a number of miles. Um, and that was all within like 2 weeks, less than 3 weeks of reading that book. And and so nowhere in that book did it say, oh, you have to know the source of emotional pain. Only accept that this is emotional pain. But I was certainly curious about what was the source of my emotional pain. And this is what I had to realize, or what I did realize, is I used to say, I don't care about the rank on my collar. I don't care about any medals that are on my uniform. I just care about taking care of sailors and getting the mission done. But here's the reality, Adam. there's some real bullshit in that. It turns out I really did care about my identity as a commander. I really did care about how I fit into the greater structure of the Navy, and losing that identity was a deeply painful, frightening, and impactful experience for me. That's what I had to realize.
Yeah, and that's the same conclusion that I came to, and really what pushed me to start this is, you know, the military is really good at building you into this thing that you're supposed to do, and that's all you're supposed to. It's the fixed mindset, right? It's just mission. I was trained to be an infantryman, kick doors in and shoot people in the face. That's what I was trained to do, and that's what I did for 12 and a half years. And then that goes away, but you still identify with that because that's all you know. Particularly, like, my case, 17 years old, that's all I knew till the time I was 30 years old, right? Like, that's a long time to be wrapped up in this one thing. And then, at least my experience, the Army doesn't give a shit about you. I had a great leader in the Army, First Sergeant Rob. If you're listening, I hope that you hang on to this, because I have. He used to say, the only thing you take with you when you leave the Army is your last name. That's it. It's the only thing that belongs to you. Everything else is horseshit. It's what they wanted you to be, and they don't care about you. And it's so true. And I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of transitioning veterans end up so far down into that transition hole, is because they keep grasping at this thing that they will never be again.
Oh man, that's so well said. I love that. Yes, that a willingness to be something new, to serve differently, to find new meaning, while simultaneously accepting that it won't be the same. I think both of those things, and it's okay that it doesn't mean that it, that we diminish our service or experience. It's quite the opposite. I think the willingness to something new also allows us to separate, to honor and celebrate more fully the previous experience, because we should say that was an amazing, impactful, powerful, important time of my life. I absolutely loved it. And I'm doing this new exciting thing also. And it's different. And it's okay to miss the other thing sometimes. That's okay. Like, because it may never be in certain ways that good again. And I don't say that in a depressing way, but I honestly feel as excited about my life and what I'm doing right now as I did about flying helicopters. Yes, it's different, and yes, I miss flying helicopters, and this is powerful and exciting as well. I have what I call the cookie cutter theory, and it relates to something that you said. So every service has a variation of this, but I'm Navy familiar, so I'll tell it from the Navy's perspective. Carrier. Okay, aircraft carrier got about 5,000 people on board, and a vast majority of those are under 20 years old, right? Or a vast number of them are under 20 years old. There are nuclear power plants on board. There's a whole bunch of ordnance on board. And this is happening in an uncertain meteorological environment, an uncertain sea environment, and in a threat environment. And when the cycle is going well, we're landing a jet every 19 seconds. It's incredible. It's incredible what that carrier does. And the only way that that whole thing works is because everybody plays their role the way that they're supposed to play it. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but we can go on deployment for 6 months at a time and not be called our name. We get called our job. We get called boss. We get called chief. We get called AM2. We get called skipper. We get called whatever our function is the name that we call each other, because we're not ourselves, except that we are, but we're not ourselves. We are a role that's functioning. So this is the cookie cutter. Like the cookie dough is us. The cookie cutter cuts out the role that we have to perform so that the carrier can do those amazing things, so that the Army can do those amazing things. The Marine Corps and the Air Force have their own component where, your mind is blown that we're able to do this routinely. It's incredible what the services do. And it's because everybody is playing their role within the boundaries that have been provided to them. But what happens to that dough that we don't need for that role? Because that's us too. That's part of us. And we just throw that dough over our shoulder because we don't need it. We only need the cookie cutter version of ourselves that performs that role efficiently and expeditiously and reliably. And there comes a time when we get out where we have a choice to go looking for that dough that we've thrown away, because that's part of us. And not every veteran makes the choice to go and remember who they are outside of the identity that was created for them in the service. And again, it's a good thing that creation of a very strict role and identity is what allows us to function, allows us to defend the Constitution, it allows us to do what we do. And when we leave the service, what about us? What about reconnecting with ourselves?
Well, and to your point, the military doesn't teach us how to do that. You can talk about TAPS or SFL TAP or ACAP when I got out, or whatever it was called. It's not an efficient system. It's very clear that they don't care. They just throw as many resources as they can at you as fast as possible, teach you how to write a resume, at least for the enlisted guys, tell you to use your GI Bill, good luck, see ya, find a career or whatever. Nobody teaches you how to sit down with yourself, look yourself in the mirror, and have that hard conversation. Okay, this is over. Who am I? And that's a mighty tough conversation to have, particularly if nobody's prepared you for it or told you that it's even necessary to do. And I think to what you said, not every veteran asks themselves that question. I think that's because not every veteran knows they have to ask themselves that question because it's never been pointed out to them.
And I'm not sure every veteran is willing or ready to have that conversation. It,
Oh, I would agree
it,
with you there for
and
sure.
and sometimes it takes a few years before we are ready. I used to be an ACP mentor. I don't know if you're familiar with ACP.
I am. I actually just started my ACP mentorship about 2 weeks ago, and I have a wonderful mentor. His name's Alexander Thimmons, and I'm gonna have him on the show at some point. But it's been incredible thus far. I've already learned so much. He's pushed me to do things that I didn't even know existed. I just applied to EBV, so looking forward to maybe getting picked up for that. And yeah, I'm having a blast with the ACP
What's
mentorship.
EBV?
The It's like Entrepreneur for Veterans Boot
Oh,
Camp or
excellent.
something like that. It's through the I'm just learning all these new acronyms, but it's like this IVMFC program or something that they put on. It's like super competitive apparently, and this man wrote me the most awesome letter of recommendation I've ever received in my entire life. And I was like so humbled to like read it, and I was like, man, are you sure about this? Like, he's like, no, dude. He's like, I've listened to every episode of your podcast. I've talked to you these 3 weeks in a row, right? Like what your plans are. He's like, this program is perfect for you. I think that you should do this. And so it's just another, networking tool, right? Like you get hooked up with somebody who knows more than you so that you can figure out more and get to where you want to
Love
go.
it. I'm glad that you're having a positive experience with that. I had a really positive experience as a mentee with ACM, and I enjoyed being a mentor with them as well. And one of the things that I noticed when I was a mentor is, so I had to ask a transitioning service member. I'd say, hey, like, when is it, like, you keep talking about work. So when do you want to, when does that feel critical for you? And and like, there was this trend. It was the funniest thing. But one of them, I'll share verbatim, which was, well, I want to give myself a little bit of time off because I'm retiring from the military. I'm like, yeah, good for you. You deserve a little time off. Like, what are you thinking? It was, well, I go on terminal leave on Friday, so I think I should be starting a new job by Wednesday. Like, okay, what's going on here? But this is what I think is going on with this obsession. And I don't want to speak for anybody's personal situation or for their finances. There might be some really practical reasons, but I suspect it's not the practical reasons that are at the forefront for our drive to get a job when we leave the service. I think particularly for the retiring types, those that have been in a little longer, our jobs, as we talked about earlier, our are our identities, right? And it is terrifying to be without an identity. So what I think is, and this is just a generalization, but I think for many of our transitioning service members, this drive to get a job is paramount, and it's driven by a need to be able to say who you are.
Yeah, I think I agree with that because that was very much the case for me when I went on terminal leave. Even though I knew I was having VA money come through, I was starting, I found out that the GI Bill would pay for flight school. So I knew I'd be starting flight school and getting, GI Bill money through that and whatnot. And financially, I was in an okay place, but my identity for so long was you're up at 4:30, you're at PT by 06, or as I became a squad leader and a platoon sergeant, you're at the war room for meetings at 5 a.m., right? To then do PT at 6. You're there till 1900 every day. Like life without that, we don't know what that is, right? Like I remember even, over the course of my career, we would go on, 15 days of leave or whatever when it block leave, however you guys do it in the Navy. I'm sure it's similar, but I would get bored by like the middle of the first week and like, man, I'm just ready to go back to work because the whole world's still going on, right? Like all your friends, if you chose to go back home, are at work. Your family is at work. They don't just get to take 2 weeks off when it's convenient for you. So for me, it was just very much like, well, I'm getting out. All my friends have jobs. They're going to be working from 9 to 5 at the very minimum. So I might as well go find something to keep myself busy too, because, I don't mind the devil's playground. And, getting out, particularly like the way I got out, I was a career guy. And so when my career gets cut short because the Army doesn't want me anymore, that turns into drinking and a lot more drinking and a lot more drinking. And then before you know it, you're just drunk all the time, and I think there's a lot of different things that go into that, but uh, I definitely do think I agree with you though. Like sometimes we do need to take that step back and use that time, use your terminal leave time to have the conversation in the mirror with yourself. Like, who am I and what do I really want out of my life? Because that will eliminate falling so far down the transition hole that you end up in a spot like where I was, ready to just give up on everything, put a gun in your mouth and call it
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah, and there's boy, you really touch on you one touch on the complexity. Like I was probably simplistic in my approach or saying, hey, all up to that point, the role I played was my entire identity because that's how it works in the military, and I don't want to be without an identity, and I don't want to be without purpose and idle hands. You referenced and learning to just be with
Right.
ourselves,
Be
to
present, being
to
present.
be
Yeah.
is
Presence.
is particularly because the military does attract. The Marine Corps likes to use the term bias for action, right? The military in general attracts people with a bias for action. They like to get things done. There are certainly exceptions to that, but learning the value of just being, in coaching, we say, do you want to be a human doing or a human being? And that speaks to truly being fully in the moment. And a lot of things can happen in that transition hole, in that space. Um, and maybe the best, a critical skill set is just the being, the ability to sit. You talk about talking in the mirror, the ability just to sit in the quiet with ourselves and to be okay with that can be probably for many veterans uh, a critical skill set.
I think so. But that's from experience. I mean, it was always uncomfortable to sit alone with myself and my thoughts until I allowed myself to be present with them, and then things change. We've been talking a lot about identity and your identity, and you in your transition gave up your entire identity by choice. You walked away from flying to pursue your leadership coaching business. So let's talk about how that process, like, what did that look like for you? And how did you determine that that was going to fill your cup?
Yeah. So so I told you, it's back at that crossroads. Do I go and do what I'm supposed to do, or do I go someplace where nobody has any idea who I am and do something there? And obviously I chose the latter. And I I allowed myself to be called. Kind of what you were saying about the conversation with ourselves. But I just finished those first 4 years teaching at the university as a professor. And really, I told you that had been a very expansive period of time for me and my understanding of what leadership is and what it could be. And honestly, yeah, I thought I had it figured out. Like, I was designated to be in charge of teams, and we got the mission done every single time. I tried to take care of people and build relationships. I'm like, all right, leadership, got it done. But I didn't understand what leadership was or is. And again, I continue to grow in my understanding of what it is and my knowledge around it. But that's still a mostly cognitive, intellectual pursuit, right? It's kind of through my professor lens. So now I feel nudged. I feel pulled by the universe. I feel it. I just sense that I'm supposed to do something in leadership development. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what jobs are in leadership development. I don't know what that is, but that's what I feel called to do. So I changed my LinkedIn title to Walt Morgan Leadership Development Specialist and waited for the job offers to roll in. They did not roll in. Um, another
No, they
another
don't.
diversion
Yeah.
to the topic, but like I thought breadth of experience would be a positive when I moved into the civilian world. Like, kind of the Navy's perspective for officers is any officer can do any job without any training, right? That's how I went from being a helicopter pilot to an intelligence analyst and briefer without any training to a leadership professor without any training, right? It's just like, yeah, you'll figure it out. And I'm like, man, what a gift I offer to the civilian world. But here's what I discovered. When a hiring manager gets a resume, they are looking for any reason to just throw you in the trash can because that makes their job easier. They have in their minds a very, very narrow strand of experience that looks like a specific degree, a specific background, and honestly, it is so typically unimaginative. It's so limited, but they're just trying to do their job. And so if you are not on that very, very narrow strand, you don't really stand much of a chance. I discovered. I was very surprised by that. That was a hard learning early on. I called, like, after not getting an interview for a position, I called back to the recruiter. I said, "Hey, just I didn't get this interview. I understand, but maybe you can help me understand what I could do better. So maybe I have more success next time." And this recruiter, and I don't think this is the norm, by the way, but this is what the recruiter said to me. She said, "Well, this is a leadership development position, and you were in the military where there is no leadership. So you're out of consideration. Yeah,
Excuse
she honest to God said that. Yeah,
what?
that's what that was said to me. And again, I don't think that's the
Wow.
norm. I don't want to portray to your audience that wherever we go and transition, people don't think that there's leadership in the military. I think most people acknowledge that. But man, this one recruiter was a gatekeeper between me and a job. And that was the story that she was telling about the military, is that people just do what they're told, and when people do what they're told, then there's no leadership. So it's remarkable.
I mean, there's a lot of problems in the job space. There's a guy who will be coming on this show eventually. He's in Japan right now. His name's Brad Tachi. I think I'm butchering his last name, but he has created a resume tool specifically for you taking your veteran experience, putting it on your resume, and then it uses some kind of AI to filter through the actual job posting so that it can make your resume look like what these headhunters are actually looking for to give you a better chance. And I guess it's more common than either you and I think that maybe these hiring managers are looking at you like leadership in the military is not what we're looking for. And it's like, it should be the only thing that you're looking for, because, I've been particularly like, seeing posts over the last week talking about just different facets of things that we do in the military. And I think we talked offline, we might have mentioned it while we are recording, about the skills that you develop in the military are high leverage skills that translate well to business: leadership, problem solving, adaptability, resilience, all that good stuff. You're evaluated on a yearly basis on those things when you're in the military, from the time you're a private. And I know the enlisted side, I know the officers have OERs. I don't know how those work. I assume they're pretty similar to the way NCOERs work, but you get counseling statements as a private. There's areas that they talk about these things. Then when you get to become an NCO, you're evaluated on 7 core things, leadership being one of them, right? And so you always know where you stand and how you're developing these skills. And there's no reason, I think, that anybody in the civilian workforce should be able to look at somebody from the military and say, you don't know how to lead. That's just a
No,
falsehood.
it's asinine, obviously. In fact, what generally, if you speak with CEOs, especially the high level ones,
The
well,
C-suite
not just
guys, yeah.
not just C-suite, but C-suite like Fortune 200, 100, right?
Oh,
Just like at
okay.
scale. If you talk to those guys and gals, they'll say, look, imagining strategy is hard, but it's not the hard part. The hard part is actually finding people to be sufficiently comfortable in ambiguity to enact strategy, to execute strategy. And I'm like, man, like these veterans that get left on the cutting room floor of employment opportunity have that skill set, right? That is where we're uniquely qualified, is to take risks in that uncertainty to keep the ball moving. And it's just the skill set that is most needed and most valued in the workplace, or that at least they say is the most valued in the workplace, is the thing that is most neglected or misunderstood in hiring in veterans. In my opinion, it's just such a lost opportunity. And of course, every veteran is different. Like I have to explain this, or I choose to explain. I don't have to explain it to anyone. I choose to explain it to different corporate entities. It's like, look, this service that the individual was in probably influenced them, and their specific role within that service probably influenced them, and their specific rank within that service influenced them. And guess what? They are their own unique, complex human being on top of all of that. Like that's kind of the funnel, outward, inward. But veteran is not a monolithic thing, even though I was just speaking about it as such a minute ago. We are each our own veteran, that each have our own strengths and opportunities, and bring our own thing to the conversation and to the job and to the role.
Yeah, I agree. I love how you talked about that you felt like the universe was calling you into this leadership coaching or development, and I assume that 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 hiring manager saying some things to you like that really just reinforced the need for you to develop your own coaching style and business, and then kind of get out there in the corporate world and show these people what it's all about. Am I correct in
Yeah, first
assuming that?
off, let me share how much I admire your commitment to keeping me on track and talking about my transition, because I have, for whatever reason, been really, really resistant to sharing that story, and so I will share it. So I felt nudged into leadership development, and the job offers weren't coming in, and then finally I did get a job offer from a Fortune 200 healthcare company, and and it wasn't a leadership development position. In fact, so I'll even say the name of the company. The company was DaVita, and DaVita is a big dialysis company. They had, at least when I came on, over 2,500 dialysis centers across the world and 70,000 people working there. But they were so intentional about their culture. It was amazing. So I used to say, the only organization that I've ever witnessed that was as intentional about their culture as DaVita was the United States Marine Corps. You know how Marines have so many rituals, they have yellow footprints, they have so many stories about Chosin Reservoir and Iwo Jima, right? These are the things that they hold on to, and Chesty Puller. Like, they have their heroes and their rituals and their stories and their artifacts. And that's very much the Marine Corps is so good with culture. They're so brilliant with it. They're so intentional with it, and that's how they hold it and share it and perpetuate it. DaVita did the exact same thing. Like, they had all of these visible stories and remnants and sayings, and that was a totally different culture, as I like to say, like a culture that revolves around, you know, killing people is quite different than the culture that
It's much
that
different.
that is
Much
dedicated
different than
to
dialysis
not
culture,
killing
right?
people, right? Different cultures. They don't look anything the same, but the intentionality is what was similar. So DaVita brought me in to be part of this culture team, to be part of this leadership team, to be engaged in this. And it was an incredible opportunity for me. Just, it's exactly what I was looking for. And this is what I would say, and maybe this will resonate with you, maybe this will resonate with your listeners. I hope so. But what I discovered very quickly, because DaVita was a very heart-centric culture, is a very emotionally forward culture. And what I learned was I had been negligent around my emotional self, and I had been negligent around my spiritual self for decades, right? The military taught me to think and do. We talked about bias for action earlier. I was probably more on the thinking side of things, but I also would think and move into action, right? That's what the military teaches us to do. That's what's valued. That's what we learn. But I have been completely negligent on my emotional self. Um, and so that time with Davida, I was there for over 3 years, but I would say particularly the first year was a very intense process in which I grew and learned and reconnected with myself emotionally, and learned to feel and learned to connect. And I can't tell you how steep and powerful that journey was in my life, but that is really the journey that I took that allowed me to serve others and support them in their journey. Is actually that allowed me to really understand what true service is. And the journey continues. Like, I continue to grow emotionally and spiritually and cognitively and physically, and in all these important ways in which we grow. But I will say that first year, like, I would be leading a I would be leading emotional work for the course of 4 days, say for a group of 50 or 60 people. And I would be holding that container, and that may or may not make sense for your listeners, some of them, but there is something energetically to holding space for the work of reflection and exploration and I'd be holding that space for everyone, and I would be leading them through emotional work. But here was the thing, Adam, I hadn't done that work yet myself. So I was leading them and myself through some extraordinarily emotional work. And then after 4 or 5 days, it was spitting me out the other side. And I was just wondering what had just happened to me. So it took me about a year to get through that phase before I'd, done the work, that work that I was leading.
I totally agree with what you're saying on the emotional side of things. I've said it several times on the show. I was a guest on Matthew Banco, his Acknowledge to Action podcast. He's on LinkedIn. If you're not following him, I think you'd really get a kick out of what he's doing. He's still in the Air Force, but he has this idea that we have a MEPS to get in the Army or the military in general, and he came up with the idea that there's a MEPS to get out. And for him, it's mental, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual, the 5 areas that you really need to work on in order to get yourself right, to identify who you are as a person, and then to move forward with a joy-filled, passionate life that is fulfilling for you. And you're speaking to one of the biggest I think there's really, for me, there's 2 really giant areas in the emotional and the spiritual side of things. And being an infantryman for a long time, I was pretty agnostic. I wasn't very spiritual. All the common things that you think about war, like why this person, why that kid, whatever, right? Like how can there be a God or this, that, and the other? And that's not what this show is about. But there's an element of spirituality, but there's also the element of the emotions. And the emotions, particularly like when you're doing infantry things over a course of 12 years and 4 deployments, you learn how to compartmentalize and turn all that stuff off. What you don't learn is how to deal with it when it all comes back, because inevitably that box that you think is sealed away forever is going to open, and all that shit's going to come out at the same time. And I appreciate you sharing that you were teaching this to people, but actively doing the work yourself. And I actually find myself in a situation now. I have a couple of transitioning veterans that are reaching out to me for help right now because they're struggling through their transition. And, I'm doing calls with them, and I'm very upfront with them because I'm all about authenticity and transparency. Who you get on this show is the same person you get on a coaching call, is the same person that you talk to in my community. Everything else. I don't change who I am or what I'm going through, but I'm very honest with them. I give them the tools that I've used. And I also tell them that, like, by talking to you and working with you and doing this with you, I'm also growing as a person. I'm also learning new things that I will then be able to share with you. Do you find that that's the case when you do your job and your business as well?
It is. When I was with DaVita, they sent me to Integral Coaching Canada, where I got my initial coaching certification. And one, integral coaching is still the most brilliant, perfect thing I've ever found in my life. It is perfect. I actually got to meet Ken Wilber the other day, the founder of Integral Theory, and this is kind of a moment for me. But integral coaching is perfect. I have a history of deconstructing things and explaining to the world why they're wrong. Right? It's one of my more enduring habits, I suspect. But I have never found the flaw in integral coaching. It As I evolve, it evolves with me, and it unfolds before me in the most perfect way that allows me to serve others exactly where they are in their journey and to support them, their growth, their development in a way that's authentic and tailored to them. So it's this truly amazing thing. But part of the in integral training, and I studied integral coaching for over a year, and I've been studying and practicing it for I think 6 years now. Part of it is I got to deal with my own shit. I have to find my own, and it is, as we talked about already. we all sacrifice at different levels in the service, and I honor everybody's military service, and I'm grateful to the military service. I feel like I sacrificed less than most, right? I love flying helicopters. I didn't deal with the things that you've already referenced were part of your military service. So that's not kind of the shit that I was getting through. Like that was less present for me. It was more of a um, why can't I sit in the stillness? Why can't I be with a person and just hear them and appreciate them and experience them deeply? And then I learned to, as I got out of my own way, I learned to do these powerful things. But really, I think coaching, as much as anything, is an exercise of getting out of our own way, suspending our own judgments, creating space with compassion and with empathy, and to really support another human being, to hear them.
I love what you're saying about the integral coaching. I don't have an integral coaching certification. I've never even studied integral coaching. However, I'm realizing as I hear you talk about this Being True to You course that I'm in, that we talked about offline, uh, a lot of the same concepts. I think she built this whole program based on integral coaching, because a lot of what we're taught is heart-centered communication. So holding space for people, meeting them where they're at, right? Understanding where they're at in their journey, and then creating the space for them to work through their own problems with a little bit of guidance. And that's kind of it, right? Like
I,
that's
I would say that would be common to, like, what you just shared and what I shared would be common to any ICF accredited coaching program, right? I think that's pretty universal. It's what you do with it and how you get there. That might vary in methodology. Obviously, I have an attachment to mine, but I know a lot of great coaches and met a lot of great coaches that aren't integral coaches, right? This is just a path that opened up for me through this training, and it sounds like you're having a really powerful experience in your own journey through coaching. Um,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, ever. It genuinely is. I think for me, and I hope that you would agree with this, but for me, just doing a 1 hour phone call with a client or whatever, I think it ended up being like almost 2 hours, because that's just the kind of person I am. I want to help you through your shit. But 15 minutes later, to get a text or an email from them saying, I just did what you told me to do, and I can't tell you how much better I feel. And it's like, yeah, man, like this is, and it's simple stuff. Like, I'm very, I don't know, aware, I guess now, but I've heard you, since we jumped on to record, you've expressed gratitude for a number of different things, and something as simple as a gratitude practice will change your life. And when you give that tool to someone and you present it to them in a way where they're going to be receptive to it, and you, I don't want to say convince them, because that's the wrong word, but they actually take action and go practice it. That's when you will get messages and emails like that. Like, this just changed my entire perspective on
Beautiful.
everything.
Beautiful. And I didn't know that I had offered gratitude. One of the practices that we have as a family, there's, my wife and I, and we have two kids, is every night at dinner, we each share three things that we're grateful for, and we go around the table. Um, and, and so we were talking about Integral Coaching Canada, but what I realized in that process is the work that I do on myself is the work that I do for others. So you're saying, do I grow with my clients? I would say out of, dozens and dozens of clients that I've had over the years, every single one of them was working on something that felt lightly familiar to me, right? So I always learn something about myself and grow, even though it's in service to them. but all the work I hire coaches for myself, right? Because I see the power of coaching and the coaching I do for others. We can't do this alone. The saying is, if we are part of the problem, then we can't be the whole solution, right? Like we need help. We need help in this journey. And so I need help in my journey. But when I hire a coach, I'm doing it for me, but I'm doing it for my clients because I'm continuing to grow so I can hold capacity for them. I also wanted, if it's okay to circle back to the spirituality bit earlier, also, when I talk about spirituality, I am talking about my sense of connectedness to things, right? And yeah,
Same. That's exactly how I view it, right? Like, so I think of, you've said it too, the universe. I think of things in terms of the universe. There, in my mind, there is a creator. I don't know what you want to call him, but I just think of it in terms of the universe. So I think
yeah,
we're on the
yeah,
same
and
page
that's
there.
for your audience. Religion is a way into spirituality. It can be. It's not always, right? My observation is it's often a detour from spirituality, but often,
Same. That's very much what it
yeah,
was
a
for me.
detour.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah. A big
yeah. So
detour. Yep.
religion can be um, a pathway to spirituality, to connectedness, and that's not the path that I chose for spirituality. And I honor and feel the things that I'm connected to. Like, on a good day, I'm connected to everything, like everything, like just the universe like fills me and I'm it, like on a good day of spirituality. But it is about just, and it's the both the humility that I am connected to something enormously powerful, and also the power of being a small thing connected to something. Like both of those things are true at once for me. But anyway, I just wanted to articulate how spirituality, like when I talked about my emotional and spiritual journey, that's what I was referring to on the spirituality side.
Absolutely, totally. And I'm very much the same way. I don't think in terms of religion. Religion is a construct that humans have formed, I think, to make sense of some of the cool shit the universe does for us, right? Like, it's, I mean, we're human. We're going to try and put a label on it and try and explain it away or whatever. Sometimes things just can't be explained. They just are what they are, and I think that's what the universe is, right? Like, for me, when I started practicing gratitude, when I learned how to love and respect myself and changed my internal monologue, it seems like the universe started to reward me because now my energy is different and what I'm putting out into the universe is what I'm going to get back. And there's no denying it. Like when you start a gratitude practice or you start being mindful of how you feel and your thoughts and your emotions and whether they serve you or not, and you try to restore the balance within yourself, the universe rewards that, and the universe rewards it pretty handsomely, in terms of giving you direction on where you're supposed to go in life, in terms of making you feel fulfilled in what you're doing in life, in terms of the opportunities that's presented to you, in terms of just your overall, just how you feel at your core, I think.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And even in a coaching session, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, or I suspect you have, is I feel I feel like something bigger than myself is moving through me in coaching. And so when I'm connected and hearing and just like there's that coaching space, and you know what I'm talking about, is like it's just kind of when I feel my heart opening and I just feel connected to that other person, and the space kind of forms around us, and we're in it. All of a sudden, like this question will drop into my lap from the universe. It's just like, be curious about this. And so I'll ask that question, and that's the thing that's going to make the difference for them. That question. Like, and it's not my question. It doesn't feel like my question. It just feels like the universe moved that question through me to change somebody else's life. And I don't know how, and maybe like your listeners are now stopping the podcast because they're like, okay, this guy's wacko, but I don't know how else to explain it, but that's what it feels like. And that's what happens. And when I ask the question that I feel like the universe has given me, their faces go into what I call the stunned mullet, which is just it,
How the fuck did that
yeah,
happen? Right. Yeah. How did you know to
and
ask
then
that
they'll
question? Brother, I don't
sit and
know.
process
Yeah.
it for a minute, and I just hold the space for them to process and consider that.
Yeah, I don't think our listeners are going to stop listening to this. I've talked about psychedelics in my plant medicine journey. In fact, as we're recording this, the episode that releases this week is with a wonderful, wonderful medicine man he was a West Pointer, but he's lived in Colombia for the last 9 years of his life, and he's working really hard with plant medicine and creating space for veterans to heal through plant medicine. So I've talked at length about I like to refer to it as just the woo woo shit because that's what everybody else wants to refer to it as. But as I connect with transitioning veterans primarily, and they reach out to me for help with their struggles and their transition, a lot of what I give them is stuff that I learned through my experience with plant medicine and the integration and the tools I'm learning, in the Being True to You coaching certification course. And the stuff actually works. They keep coming back to me and it's like, I thought this was woo woo, but I actually tried it. And it's like, dude, you make a lot of sense. Like this shit works. And it's like, I wish sometimes like I could wring some veterans' necks, right? And just be like, just give it a shot. Open your mind just enough to try this and seriously try this and see what happens for you. Because I guarantee you're going to be pleasantly
Yeah, we're
surprised.
all humans, right? Like like you say that
All
for
humans.
veterans. I say
Yeah.
that
I
for
say, I
corporate
say veterans.
executives. It's
Yeah.
just like, and it doesn't have to be plant based, and it can be, but it doesn't have to be. But just open your heart to something bigger and open your body to transformational change that will allow you to create the impact that you dream of if you're just willing to explore how you're getting in your way and open yourself up to a process to transcend that. And most of my clients are executives, and many of them do, but our corporate Western world is so um, or
Brainwashed.
cognitive in its approach to everything, right? That
Yeah, that may be
I
true
just wrote a
too.
post on LinkedIn this morning, which essentially it was about like there's a lot of coaching companies selling this like off the shelf, out of the box sort of take these assessments and here's this training that we offer to you, and and it feels so good to the Western corporate mind, like, oh, it's something I can visualize and see, and it feels tangible, and there's a process, so we're going to buy that. When the real value in coaching is so open that you can't put it in a box, you can't make it a process. It is about, like, I have a methodology, but it's not a process, right? It's
Right, because each client is different in their own unique needs. There's no one size fits all. There's no process that's going to get us through that, right? Like when I am coached by the people that coach me, I'm very self-aware because of all the work that I've been doing on myself. So it ends up being more of a I vent a lot and I work through my thought process, and then they pick up on the things and give me advice based on that versus like when I coach someone who's new to the space who has no idea, I have to give them so much more, and they don't quite have that process down to talk through the things using the tools that they already have. Right. How do you put a process to those two different
right,
people? You don't.
right. You meet them where they are, and then you creatively build a new path for them that that embodies change, not just understand, because most of them can understand the change that they need. Oh, I need to better be able to do this, but they can't do it until they have a transformational change that does reside in their body, and then all of a sudden they'll have transcended that thing that was in their way and have all of these choices and opportunities in their life they didn't have before. Now, I make a living of selling that to corporate businesses. You can only imagine how hard my life is, because it'd be a lot easier to have something on a shelf, but it's not the thing that works.
For sure. So let's talk about that. So how did you get into the corporate space? And then I know you have some veteran offers also in your coaching business, which I'm not surprised, but how did you just decide like I'm gonna do this on my own outside of the Fortune 200 company? This is what I want to do.
Yeah, so really good question. So one, when I did my initial training with Integral Coaching Canada, I'm like, okay, like I had this nudge from the universe a while ago, and this is where it was leading me. I didn't know it at the time. It was very ambiguous at first, but this is specifically what I've been called to do, is coaching within this methodology. So that let me know that it was time to find a way to focus specifically on that kind of coaching practice. So, um, so I knew, even as I did my initial integral coaching training, that it was it was time. Like I knew, and so within a year, um, I hung out my shingle as an independent coach and started my business. That was 4.5 years ago. So I've been doing this uh, for a while as an independent coach. Um, did that answer your question?
Absolutely, because it leads right into my next question. So, within a year, you knew that you needed to go out on your own. How did you overcome the fears and all the shit associated with leaving the corporate job to start your own thing? Because it's inherently risky, right? It's not something that we're taught in general in Western society. Like I don't know, I've got feelings on the school system and all kinds of stuff like that, right? Like they're creating wage slaves is what I call them, right? They don't tell you about business. And I think that's for a reason, right? They don't, who was it that famously said, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of doers.
Mm, I don't know.
I think was it Carnegie? I think it was
Okay,
Carnegie or
that sounds
one of
right.
those guys back then when, but for me, like I grew up in Southern Indiana, like you. I joined the army to get the fuck out. I just wanted out. I wasn't going to be a farmer. I didn't come from one of the families who had been there for 100 years that had established the construction companies or whatever. And I just wanted out. I didn't want to stay in Posey County in Indiana. I knew there was more to the world. I knew there was much, much more for me to go and do. Some other things that I dealt with growing up, like people that you're supposed to look up to treating you like, the opposite way of how they should have, and this, that, and the other, telling me I wasn't ever going to make anything of myself. So I figured, like, I'm going to go show you, how did you deal with that? Like, how did you learn about entrepreneurship? How did you make peace with, hey, I'm stepping out of something that is comfortable and I have to be uncomfortable being uncomfortable for a
Yeah,
while?
and so I think I'm still learning that, even 4.5 years later. It's an ongoing journey. But as far as that initial, yeah, so
Decision, right? Because that's what it
one of the
was.
things that was happening at the time is, so my wife has graciously sacrificed her career, for my career when I was in the military, because it's tough to do anything when you're traveling, uprooting every 2 to 3 years. And I do really honor the sacrifice that military families make, because it's, our loved ones do sacrifice a lot. I think it's sometimes easier to deploy than it is to stay behind. Um, and so my wife is by trade an elementary teacher, and she had been teaching kindergarten half time, and that was fine. And our kids were really young then, so, and taking care of children. Um, and then the governor of Colorado announced that all kindergarten would be full time, and so she was moving into a full time job. I was traveling 50% of the time for my job, doing these programs all across the nation, and I wanted to support her move into full time work. And so it was a decision about this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's a decision for my family to be more available and to support my wife in her career. And it was also, I would say, made possible by a pension, right? I can talk about my courage all day, but I knew that we weren't going to starve. We might not take the vacations that others get to take, and there was some risk that I'd be overall making less money, but I knew that we're going to have enough, and that's enough, right? I don't need more than enough. And so my runway was lengthened by that. And, over the 4.5 years, it's been some boom and some bust. I was going through a bust period and I talked to a friend who did really well in selling coaching. I'm like, what's your secret? What do you do? And he said, I listen with faith and opportunities show up. And he told me a story where he was training for a marathon and he was feeling resentful that he was training for a marathon and had to go for a run when he felt like he should have been creating clients. But he said, you know what? I'm going to do both today. I'm just going to open myself up on this run. And he went for his run and he saw a name on a billboard. And it's like, the name was like Kelly or whatever. And he's like, Kelly, why is that name just calling to me? Why is it calling? Kelly, I don't know any Kellys. Continues running. And he says, oh, I do know Kelly. Yeah, I know Kelly. So as soon as he got home from his run, he called the Kelly that he knows, and Kelly became his next client. And I'm like, okay. And so, like a week after he shared that story with me, I met my next client on a chairlift while skiing.
There you go. The universe leaves us clues. We just have to
Oh,
be
we
able
have
to
to
see
be
them.
listening. And I forget that lesson again and again. Um, earlier this year I was going through another kind of bust period with my coaching. It's just again boom bust, boom bust, and I was feeling frustrated, and I could feel myself tightening up and losing faith in what I was doing. And I've never questioned what I do because I feel so strongly called to it, but I was starting to feel kind of shaky, and there was somebody that I follow and admire. Um, she just puts a lot of good into the world. She's an incredible thinker, and she does important things. And I've seen her on panels, and I listen to her podcast. And she wrote something on LinkedIn that said, "Hey, I think I'm burning out. Like something's going on." So I reached out to her. I'm like, "I'm very aware of who you are. You don't know who I am, but I'd like to offer a pro bono coaching program for you because I so value what you do and I want to support you in doing that and help you." And so she didn't get back initially. And I was like, shit, man, I can't even give my coaching away right now. Like, what the hell's going on? And then she got back after 2 days and she said, yeah, I'm so grateful for your offer. And I wanted to go back and do a little research. So I researched you and listened to some podcasts that you were on to see if this was a fit. She said, it is a fit. So if the offer still stands, let's do this. So then we had our first coaching session, and this happened. This happened. As soon as I hung up in that first coaching session with her, my phone rang, and it was somebody who was going through something. And I said, "Hey, this is what I do for a living. Let me help you. Like just let me coach you. It's going to require an investment on your part, but let me coach you. Let me support you through this." And that became my next client. And it's just a reminder for me that when I connected to doing the thing that I loved and opened myself up to that, then something came back.
Yeah, man, I love that, dude. That's it. It's true. I do some work. All the work that I've done for any of the transitioning veterans to this point has been 100% free. I've not charged a single veteran yet, and they get so much out of it. They tell their other people about it, and then somebody reaches out to me like, "Hey, I could really use a mentor." Like, yeah, sure, book the time. Let's do this. You know what I mean? Like, I genuinely just was I believe I was put here on this earth to do what I'm doing now. And if I continue to do that, eventually everything's going to work out the way that it's supposed to do.
And I don't know how your audience is going to feel about this, but sometimes charging for something creates value too. Sometimes, and that's what I did say to this pro bono client. I'm like, my only ask is that you show up as if you're paying $20,000 for this coaching. There's coaching companies that sell my coaching for $30,000 for the exact same program I'm giving her for free. So just treat it as such. And she has, like, she can. I just got off a call with that particular client right before we jumped on today, and she's excellent, and she has taken it very seriously. But sometimes the investment that clients make in their coaching actually allows them to get some more out of it.
Yeah, it's a psychology game, right? They invest money, so they're like beholden to this thing because they invested in themselves. They feel like there's more value because they put money into it versus giving everything away for free. It's just like, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I won't. They don't take it as
Right. And
seriously,
they
I
actually
think.
get more out of it when you charge more. And there's a fine line when it comes to helping veterans, right? Like, we want to be able to support veterans for their service how we can. Um, so, so overcharging veterans isn't on my list of things that I want to do. And my experience is clients generally get more out of coaching when they pay for it.
I'll take your word for it because I haven't charged anybody for my coaching yet, but that's coming down the pipe real soon as I get busier and busier. And so, I can't wait to find out for myself. How did you come up with your coaching program, and how did you tailor that to specifically address, I guess, what I'm talking about here, because you do have both sides of it, the veteran coaching and the executive coaching, specifically to veterans. How did you arrive at the program that you have? The one that I pulled from your website is a 5-session package, and I really like how this is laid out with the understanding your service, naming the skills, identifying those skills that you benefited from, highlighting new skills. The the part where you talk about being focused on getting a job is one of my favorite parts because I agree with that 100%. And then you talk about the roles and uh, not holding on to your service and downplaying it or feeling like you should do more because you did do enough. So how did you
Hmm.
lay this framework?
So when I got hired by DaVita, one of the things that they wanted me to do is, I had a number of programs I was working on, but one of them was a veterans program. It's just something that they're a top veteran employer, and they wanted to offer space for their veterans to be together and to create community. So that became something that I took over and continued to build. And there was a lot that came out of that for me. One of the things is that veterans would much rather talk to some of this stuff with other veterans, right? Like, it's very, so empathy requires a landing place. And unless we think that what we're sharing can land in a way that is connecting, we just simply don't share it. And so veterans feel, in my observation, more willing to share. So this was a 3-day program, and and I just massaged it based on outcomes that I was witnessing and the things that I saw veterans were reacting to, right? Like, the things that seemed to be working. So some of the things that worked were, one, naming, and this is something I'd offer to your audience as well, that naming what we've lost in transition, right? It can be anything. We might have lost relationships, connection, purpose, stability of pay. yeah, social identity, right? We could have like I don't want to. Everybody's on has their own experience. Although I will say the thing that I heard the most for loss was the willingness just to say what I'm thinking, right? Like because so many of our veterans feel like they kind of have to, they can't walk on eggshells. Absolutely. Um, and if the underlying is, here's another quick story. My first week at DaVita, one of my colleagues said, "Hey, isn't it great to be here where everybody is so nice to each other instead of in the military?" It's my first week in civilian employment, and I'm totally triggered because everybody I love is in the military. And I said, "Well, everybody does seem to be really friendly here, but right or wrong, the underlying assumption in the military is that we're all willing to die for each other. And so while everybody's quite nice, I haven't exactly gotten the willing to die for me vibe just yet. And it, and it's when we assume that we're willing to sacrifice deeply for each other, you can say whatever you want, right? Because you're somebody that's willing to sacrifice for me, and I'm somebody that's willing to sacrifice for you. So you can just speak the truth. And so when we get into civilian organizations, understandably, the willingness around sacrifice is a little bit less, considerably less in some cases. So with that, also becomes less of an ability to speak our truth. And that's something that I noticed that veterans really were missing. So that's one example of something that we might do in a corporate program is just name the loss. Once we name it, then we can honor it and move on from it. But so many times with veterans, we get stuck in the loss of our transition and we never move into the beautiful possibilities that lie in front of us. So that's one thing. Just an invitation to feel things, to feel emotion, I think is an important part of it of what at least we offered in that corporate program is look, like I said, I didn't know how to feel very well when leaving the military. In fact, I was just a month or two into my new job, and I was up on stage in front of a large group doing some, speaking and presenting. And somebody from the C-suite of this Fortune 200 company sent me an email, and it said, "Great job on your willingness to get in front of a crowd just starting off in this work. I did notice that you're very much in your head, not in your body, and that you felt very restrained and withheld, and the audience could feel it, and I could feel it. If you want any help working on this, let me know, and I'm happy to help." And so I wrote back. I said, "Thank you so much for your feedback on this. I'll work on it. I'll let you know if it needs some help. Respectfully, Walt, send." But even after I sent that email, Adam, I could just feel this tightness in my chest. I could feel it just sitting there, this tightness. And I'm like, okay, you're working on emotion. You're working on naming and feeling emotions. What emotion are you feeling right now? And I'm like 47 years old at this point, right? And like, what is this emotion that I'm feeling? And I'm like, okay, it's not fear. I don't think I'm going to get fired. It's certainly not sadness. Oh, I know what it is. It's shame. I feel shameful that I didn't live up to the standard, and I'm feeling shame. And Adam, the craziest thing happened. As soon as I said that, I felt the tightness. As soon as I said it, and more importantly, felt it, the tightness just began to dissolve immediately. I'm like, holy shit. Like, where was that in my 20s when I was getting drunk and getting in fights? Like, where was that skill set of just feeling what I feel? And I didn't have to label it a good emotion or a bad emotion. it was just what I was feeling, and that's all it was. And it only wanted me to recognize it. And once I recognized it, it moved on. It was like magic. I was 47 years old before I found that. I'm like, man, I could have used that sooner.
But mindfulness is a pretty cool thing, isn't it? It's amazing when you're mindful of how you feel. Particularly, a lot of the psychedelic integration work is understanding why you feel like what you're feeling in that moment, and then you kind of peel back the layers of the onion. Okay, when have I felt like this before? When have I felt like this before? And then you actually end up at the root cause of that maybe that emotion plagues you and you can't get past it, and you realize, well, this doesn't serve me, and you just magically let it go. And it's just the power of being mindful. And to your point, you acknowledged that you were shameful, and immediately it was like, whether you let that go or not, whether you explored it or not, your body knew that it was time to let that go because you had
Yeah,
recognized the feeling.
yeah, beautifully said. Um,
It's a cool thing, man, and like I said, we I like to refer to it as the woo woo stuff, but this is, I think, the stuff that we should be teaching everybody in the world. To your point, like, these are real life skills that really work, that aren't often talked about enough or looked at, I guess, in just kind of an alternative light that is not okay, or whatever. I don't know where that comes from or why, but I'm a little upset it was hidden from me
yeah,
for so
I kind of
long.
went like I said, I kind of went through the same thing. Where was that all my life? But we create stories about emotions that we're allowed to feel, and I think the first step is getting through this idea that there are good emotions and bad emotions. There's certainly some emotions that feel better than others, but that's just how we're connecting with the world in that moment. And just accepting that that's how we're supposed to feel in that moment. We're not supposed to feel another way. That's just what we're feeling, and that's the right thing to feel is enough. Something else with veterans that I think is important is knowing that not everything that worked in the military is going to work outside the military. And so some of the work that we do in veteran transition programs is like, all right, what's the thing that worked for you in the military? Like, what is it that worked for you and allowed you to be successful? And what are those habits? What are those ways of showing up? What are the okay? And which of those things will continue to serve you? Like that leading through ambiguity, being comfortable in ambiguity, speaking your truth to a point. Like, what are the things that will continue to serve you? But what are some of those things that worked for you in the military that aren't going to work for you in the civilian life, right? And just knowing, like, I think my assumption when I was transitioning is everything I learned in the military was going to offer value, and it's just simply not true. Like, some of the stuff needed to be left behind, and and so that's okay. Let's talk about what it is, and let's leave it behind. Let's talk about what it is that you want to continue that will conserve you as a civilian. But here's the one that a lot of people are surprised by. Let's talk about what you need, what you would benefit from creating. Like, what is it that would serve you that you don't have yet? How would you like to be better? And it could be tactical, like, I need to learn these things, I need to develop these skills. But it can be you. It could be as simple as, I need to be more emotionally aware. I would like to be able to control my temper better. I would like to be able to have hard conversations with members of the opposite sex. Like, I don't know what it is, but the same hard conversations that we have that you might have had in infantry, those might be harder with somebody that doesn't share our gender. So, it could be a thousand different things that we need to build. For me, I kind of shared earlier, it was learning to sit in the details of others and to be in them with compassion and to hold space for those things. I didn't have that before, and that I've been very worked very, very hard on that. It's a willingness to the woo woo. Maybe the skill set is just not to dismiss something that sounds woo woo and say, "Oh, that sucks," right? Like,
I think that's like the main takeaway, right? Like keep your mind open to receive new information. Give it a shot. Like I'm not saying that this well, I kind of am saying that this will work for everybody because I do believe that, but not every aspect of what we've talked about here today is right for everybody. I think a prime example, like for myself, everybody talks about journaling. You should journal, you should journal, you should write everything down. It doesn't work for me. I hate it. I just not a journaler. I've never been a journaler. I've never been a writer. Not that I don't have the ability to write. I do have the ability to write. I'm pretty good at it when I do it, but I just don't enjoy it. It's not for me. I use voice notes to myself instead. And that's even more uncomfortable, which is kind of funny because you'd think as a podcaster and somebody who is being very called to public speaking here lately that I would be okay listening to my own voice notes in my own podcast. That is contrary. I hate it. And I think the reason I choose to use voice notes to help me through things is because it does make me uncomfortable to hear my own voice. Like I'm talking to myself when I leave these voice notes. I literally start it with, "Hey, future self, this is the date," or whatever, almost like a old Star Trek, right? Like Captain's log. But it works for me. And I've been told a million and one times that you need to journal, you need to journal, you need to journal. Well, dude, that doesn't work for me, but I do have something in place that takes the place of that. And it's because I kept my mind open and found a different way
mhm.
of doing it, right? It's the same
Yeah,
principle.
I'd say openness is something that all humans can benefit from. That might be hard if we're coming from a very structured military environment. And maybe that's the skill set to be able to operate without, I talk about how good veterans are in ambiguity, but there's also a structure that buoys us through that ambiguity that might be necessary to learn to operate without. How to move into one of my areas of opportunity might be to move into action without somebody senior to me directing it. Like, it's different for everyone, but so those are some of the things that oh, and also I think it's really important to build a narrative about what our service meant, right? This is what my military service meant. This is why it matters. It's why it matters. And it's okay if that changes and evolves, right? In 2 years, it might be necessary to revisit the narrative of your service as we evolve and to look at sort of in a different lens and understand it differently. That's okay. But every veteran has been scared, even if it was just in a training environment, right? We're safer than we realized. You remember being in SEER school, getting the crap beaten out of me. It's just like, this sucks. Like, and I couldn't even know it was training at the time. Like, even though it should have been obvious that it was training, all I knew is I was getting the crap beat out of me, and like, this sucks. And so, um, we've all been scared at some point. We all raised our hand and swore to serve something larger than ourselves. We've all been in relationship. We've all felt insufficient in our service in some way. I mean, these are things in my observation that all veterans share. But what is the story of our service? Can I share a really quick story? And we've been chatting for a while. I suspect. I don't know. I'm not watching the time, but I came back from Afghanistan where I was a REMF, um, and I came back to my home in Coronado on my son's second birthday. And I actually remember busting my ass just sprinting through airports so I could make it back for a second birthday. Um, and about that time, there was a Navy EOD service member that was killed in action, and they were bringing back the service members' remains to Coronado, and there was going to be a funeral procession that went through the main road through Coronado, and I just felt like so much shame about the insufficiency of my service in Afghanistan. Like you were out there, at the same time, Adam, like in just true danger, doing these extraordinarily dangerous things. And, me and everybody I knew was eating ice cream at the DFAC, right? It's like so shamefully. Every story that you guys were telling yourself at the FOB was absolutely true. Like,
Probably. Well, that became very apparent when the Apache guys. I'm probably not supposed to tell this story, but I'm going to do it anyway. When we were out at Cap Mushan in Afghanistan, the Apache guys, we were doing a lot of work and they were getting a lot of action, and so they thought fit to bring us boxes of pizza from Kandahar out to our little company, less than a company size cop, and that was like the coolest day ever. So we know the stories are true, but I would argue from our perspective, you're flying a machine that only flies because it makes so much noise that the earth physically rejects it, right? So I mean, every part on that machine is built to fail, right? Like there's so many points of failure on that thing. So I wouldn't diminish what you did or look at that, and I'm guilty of it too, right? Like I look at our big brothers in the special forces community, right? And then above them, and it's like, well, who am I? I'm just a fucking leg who didn't, I didn't do anything as cool as those guys did. And then somebody kind of put it into perspective for me. Another is a Green Beret guy talking to him, and he's like, dude, sometimes we think that you conventional infantry guys did more than we ever did because of just the length of our
yeah, yeah.
deployments.
Oh, and in infantry, and it doesn't matter. Like we all served enough, and that's, but I did come back from Afghanistan feeling shameful about that. And yes, like flying helicopters at ships in particular is dangerous. And I've had some close calls, and I've lost a lot of friends doing that work. So I acknowledge that nature. But in this particular case, like, people would thank me for my service. I don't know what they're thanking me for because, I think many veterans have a reaction to being thanked for our service. And so I went to this funeral procession, and it, it, and I was in my flight suit, and I was holding my 2-year-old son, and I saluted as the casket containing, Lieutenant Chris Moscow went by, and I was aware that I was being photographed, and and then then the next day, that photograph of me holding Gus, and Gus is holding an American flag, and I'm in my flight suit, ran on the front page of the San Diego Tribune, and I was absolutely ashamed and mortified. Right, like this, like it might have created a striking image, and I understand that, but I was the guy that didn't sacrifice enough, honoring the one that sacrificed too much. And that that photograph kind of became emblematic of my shame. And it was several years later that Chris Moscow's father reached out to me, and he shared that he had that photograph displayed in his home and how much it meant to him. Yeah. And that just became my reminder that we'll never fully know the impact of our service. And so when we create these narratives that incorporate shame and insufficiency, remember, we were the ones that raised our right hand. And it might have become routine at some point, and and it might feel like others sacrificed more than we did, but we raised our right hands to serve something larger. And we don't fully know the impact that we create through that. And in my case, and probably many others out there, some of the events that feel most shameful to us are potentially some of the events that had the greatest impact. Or not, or not, I don't know. It's different for everyone. But we probably created more impact than we ever realized.
Yeah, I agree. How important would you say it is for transitioning veterans to entertain the idea of seeking a coach to build a support system during
Yeah,
that transition?
so I'm a coach, so I think I'm a coach who hires coaches. Like you're asking me this question, everybody should be investing in coaching. Like coaching is the thing that changed my life, both as a client and as a coach. I see enormous transformational value, and I'm starting to think of it as the hood fan in your kitchen, right? You're cooking, the hood fan's on, it's initially obnoxious, but then you don't hear it anymore. And it just becomes normal until you shut it off. And then you're like, oh God, how did I live like that? How did I live with that? I feel so much better now. And that's kind of I'm finding the best way to describe my own experiences with coaching. Like once I get through that thing and I'm on the other side, it just kind of feels like that hood fan has been turned off in the kitchen. And I'm like, oh, it seemed normal before, but it feels so much better now. I'm able to do the things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do before. I feel more in control. I have more opportunities. And I don't know any way to get to that outcome without a coach.
I love that answer. That's such a great answer. Invest in yourself. Tiger Woods had a coach, Kobe had a coach. All the professional athletes that you look up to have a coach. Everybody's got a
Yeah.
coach. Get a
And their
coach.
coaches are human coaches, right? They're coaches about them that allows them to perform in life better, to show up better for life. And when they show up better for life, then they can do the technical, tactical things better. Like if an executive in business hires me, I'm not going to tell them how to run business. That's their job, right? I am going to explore with them how they're getting in their way, and then I'm going to help them get out of their way so they can run business better, be better in relationships, or be better strategic thinkers, or show up better for everybody around them, or just to shut off that hood fan.
Absolutely. I love it, man. How do you, what are some of the major goals you have for translational lift coaching over the next few years, and where do you
Yeah,
see it at?
so one, I definitely want to get to a place where it's less boom or bust, right? Like I just want to have a more steady flow of clients rather than getting three 1 month and zero for the next 2 months and then, three again. I just steady, reliable flow to create the foundation of my business. But I thought that one-on-one integral coaching was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And in a sense, it is. And each of those people that I coach, I believe, go on to make an impact through other people. And there's a ripple effect, but it's still only one person at a time. So really, I'm looking at scale, like get get the steady foundation of the business and build scale from there. As you mentioned in the intro, I created a coaching program for students at the University of Colorado. I believe that as a society, we should start coaching sooner and credible leadership development sooner so that we can our young people can make greater impact through their lives to make a difference in this world. I think we're at a critical junction in humanity
For sure.
where
Without
we
question.
need
Yeah.
to collectively show up better as leaders. I think we need to understand leadership fundamentally differently, and I think that it's essential for the survivability of our species. I don't say that. There have been other moments in history where at critical junctures. I just feel like we're at one right now. And I think that raising our collective leadership capacity is essential. And I think that begins by starting that journey younger. And so I would like to build to scale and continue emphasizing leadership development for younger people who are ready to be intentional about that part of their journey and their growth.
That's awesome. How has the program at the university been received, and are you getting good feedback on it?
Oh, so good. Oh, so good. So we do different kinds of research. We do kind of like professional university research, and we do emotional intelligence research using Goldman's IEQ 2.0. And then we get qualitative research, and it's just reading through last semester's qualitative research of these lives that feel transformed through the growth that these young people are making. But the emotional intelligence is staggering. On average, our students are growing their comprehensive emotional intelligence 17% in just 4.5 months. It's amazing. And we're not focusing on emotional intelligence. It's just this kind of byproduct of the work that our students are doing as they become more self-aware. Um, and so that program's going really well. It just got picked up for another 3 years of funding. So we're going to be able to continue this work, and the university has been incredibly supportive of it. And the CU Center for Leadership has been amazingly supportive of getting these students professional leadership coaching. So thank you for asking. It's really exciting where it's going.
Well, that brings me more questions. So, any plans to try and get this into other universities?
I think that might be the scale that I'm looking at. And I'm not stating that because that hasn't really become clear, but I've been curious if that is the next step. If I'm interested in coaching young people and I'm able to create this program here, and other universities do have coaching programs, but what can I do to promote this? And maybe it goes beyond university, right? Maybe it goes like university attracts a certain kind of person, but what about the young people that aren't at university? How do we serve them in their leadership journeys and their development so they can make impact? You don't need to go to university to make an impact in this world. In fact, I think it's sometimes useful if you if you don't. I, I mean, it's mixed. I mean, I don't want to. I think sometimes universities get a bad rap, and I think it's actually they serve an enormously important um, function, particularly around critical thinking and processes. And university isn't the only place that you can learn those things. And there's a whole bunch of universities that don't go to the university that are absolutely worth investing our leadership focus in so that they can go change the world also.
I love that, man. Dude, how can everybody get in touch with you? Where can they find you on social media to learn about translational lift coaching and connect with you if they're interested in your services and all that good stuff?
Yeah, first off, they're just interested in talking about leadership. They're interested in talking about coaching. They're interested in talking about veterans transition. Your audience can just reach out to me, right? Like if you want to have a conversation, email me. And my email is Walt, WALT, at tliftcoaching.com. That's the letter T, lift coaching.com. And my website's really similar. It's tliftcoaching.com. There's also a contact form there if you want to reach out from that website, and if you just want to explore. But I am anxious to serve your audience or have a conversation with them or hear them or understand them. So don't be shy about reaching out. It's a conversation that I'd be
Yeah,
excited to
definitely.
have.
And your website has tons of good information on it. Having done my homework on you and visited your website, it's all laid out, very organized. You get the answers to your questions on there. I would highly encourage anybody who is interested in what Walt is doing to go check that out. You're most active on LinkedIn, right? So people can connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. In fact, that's the only social media that I do or have ever done, and it's kind of a professional hazard, but I am most active on LinkedIn.
For sure. Any final thoughts that you want to leave the veterans and, well, just the listeners of this show with?
Thank you for raising your right hand, serving something larger than yourself, and for those of your listeners that aren't veterans, um, thank you for being here with this conversation and for the good that you bring into this world. And I just invite everybody to be intentional around their journey. I think it's why we're here is to continue to grow and get better and to overcome and to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes and to keep on going with the even though it's hard to connect with sometimes with the promise that there is purpose and meaning and opportunity to serve and and even sometimes when it's hard to find, that's what makes it more meaningful. So I'm I'm with all of you in your journey, and I'm grateful for all of you.
I love it, man. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to rate, review, like, subscribe. Help us get to our goal of 1 million veterans who've listened to this show by the time I turn 40 on May 9th, 2025. I know it's a lofty goal, but I know the power of our community and it can be done. So I'm going to say this every episode until it happens. Please help us get there. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you a Mr. Walt Morgan. Really appreciate you being here, brother. Thank you for taking the time. This was an amazing conversation.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate you, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this today.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at the Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.